In today's video, I want to show you how we can create this beautiful outdoor wilderness scene from scratch. Let's check it out. Hello and welcome everyone to Blended Graphics. My name is Jason Ortega, and for today's episode is going to be episode number 2 in our series of creating a scene. We already did something similar to this a few videos back, where we ultimately ended using the Pokemon Milotic into our Arctic scene. This one, I got a little inspiration from the legend himself, Bob Ross. So we are going to use all these different mountain images and tree images, and we're going to pull these together to create one incredible scene. I originally created this series because creating scenes was probably one of my weakest points with Photoshop and just designing in general. I really struggled to try and figure out how I was going to connect all of these images together to create this overall composition. After practice and more practice, I got more confident with it, and so I wanted to put these videos together to give you some tips and tricks along the way, because maybe you're someone like me who also struggled with this and are still struggling with this. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump right into this composition. And to start things off, I want to show you all of the images that we're going to be using for this tutorial. So we have a sky, and then we're going to have a lot of different mountain images, as well as some valleys and trees. One of the big things when you are looking for images for your composition is to really try and find images that are very similar, because that's going to help blend things together and make things very cohesive. Also try to find images where your main subject and reference point are set at different distances. So find things that are very far away and things that are very close by, because that's also going to create some interesting characteristics within your composition. All right, so moving on, let's turn on our first ground layer that we're going to use. And this will be our base, so we'll Command T, and let's just bring this down, and we're going to just scale this up a little bit. And once we have that in spot, we can press Enter. And we added a layer mask, and with the pen tool, I'm just going to essentially make a selection out of this area that I don't want to use, and we're going to fill that layer mask with black once we have this complete. So we'll do that, right click, make a selection, and then let's fill that with black. So now we have our ground layer, and we're going to build off of this. From here, we can bring in our rock image, and we can drag this all the way down to the bottom. Press P for our pen tool, and we're going to create a selection of what we want to keep, and essentially just extract from that background. I personally just like to use the pen tool because I think it's going to give you the most precise selection. You can use your quick selection tool if you want, but for this, I think I'd rather choose this tool. And once we have a selection, we'll hit that layer mask. And then we can Command T to bring up our transform panel, and we're just going to nudge this to the right. So somewhere that just looks good. There we go. And then we can bring up our original ground layer again, but this one is flipped over horizontally. And like I said, it's good to have these similar images for continuity's sake. And once we position this, I'm not going to show you those same steps of extracting it from the background. We're just going to get right to that. And now that we have our foreground pretty much set, let's start working with that middle ground area. And I'm going to bring in an image here that has this nice little hill on the right side, and we're going to scale this up so it flows nicely with our foreground. And we can accept that. And going back to the pen tool, we'll repeat the same steps of just selecting out the area that we don't want and filling that layer mask with black once we have the selection. Okay, fill it with black. So now we just keep the mountainside here. And for this next image that I'm going to drop in here, it's mainly going to act as kind of a connector piece between our foreground and this middle ground area. We're only going to use the small bottom left corner of this. So I'm just going to fit it to where I want it to, and then I'm actually going to switch to a brush tool and use a soft round brush, and we're just going to erase the majority of this and just keep this bottom left corner. And I'm only really using this just because it's something a little bit different. It doesn't really add to the composition very much, but for my peace of mind, I just wanted to include it in there. All right, let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to bring in our sky image and Command T to drag this up. We're also going to scale this up as well. So just kind of find a nice spot for it. I am going to have some more mountains on that left side, so that part of the sky will not be visible. So I'm just keeping that in mind. And with our middle ground and foreground set, let's bring in this next image, which is going to help us kind of transition to that background and help create this depth of field. So I'm scaling this down, And let's hit enter. And now we need to take care of business and get rid of that sky. And we're defaulting back to our favorite tool, the pen tool. And then with a hard round brush, I'm just going to clean this up a little bit so it's not too jagged. All right, time to drop in our mountains, and we're just gonna push this over to the left side. And you know the deal. Let's get rid of the sky because we don't need that. And then we're also gonna have some mountains on the right side as well that we're gonna put in. Good. All right, I think I wanna just drag the sky up a little bit so we can have more of those clouds. Yeah, that looks much better. So somewhere right around here. And now we can bring in the mountains that we are gonna use for the right side. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. And then let's just get rid of that sky. Perfect. Okay, so now I want to incorporate some more trees so it's not so boring in that background, and this image is going to help us out. Let's reduce the opacity so we can kind of see how we need to position this, and we also going to need to rotate this so everything lines up accordingly. Okay, and now we need to get rid of the parts of this image that we don't need to use. And with that gone, we can see a little bit better of how we can tweak this a bit more so that everything lines up. So we're going to rotate this a bit and push it over. Okay. And the image below, we're just going to drag that down a little bit. All right, and now I'm going to double click on that thumbnail of that layer, and we're going to go into the original image, and with the spot healing brush tool, I'm just going to erase some of these houses that I really don't want in our picture. And I'm pretty happy with this, so I'm going to hit File and then Save, and then I'm going to go back into our original composition. And we're going to add some more trees here on the left side, so that will also help us kind of create more of a connector image there between our middle ground and our background. So we'll scale in this down, and then we're going to use our pen tool and just get rid of this area that we don't need on top. And once that's done, we're going to do the same thing that we did on our other image. We're going to double click on that thumbnail, use our spot healing brush tool to get rid of the areas that we don't want, and then we can hit save once we're ready. Okay, and now let's go back into our original image. And I'm going to pause things for just a second, and I just want to say that working with hair and trees are probably two of the most difficult things to work with, especially when it comes to selections. It is really hard to create a precise selection out of these things, and ultimately, I find that to get the best results, you need to create a brush and paint some of that back in once you already have your selection. And that's essentially what we're going to do with the trees here. I encourage you to find maybe a 3D image or an image of a tree or branch that already is excluded from the background and turn that into a brush. And this way we're going to just paint black on the layer mask of the trees. And this is going to help bring us back that definition and kind of that integrity of the tree itself, so it doesn't look so straight edged and we can bring that shape back. All right, so on that tree layer, I'm going to hit Command T, and I'm just going to do some little tweaking with this and scale it up a little bit. All right, so that looks good. Okay, so now we have all of our images in place, and now what we need to do is just start blending everything together so that everything looks very cohesive. And the first thing that I want to take care of is that slope area right by the mountains on the left side. I want to change that green so it matches the grass layer that's on top of it. And to achieve this effect, we're going to add a selective color adjustment layer, clip it below, go to our green channel, and just move these anchors around until we get that desired effect that we're looking for. I usually use the selective color adjustment layer when I just want to adjust one color. All right. Now I want to add a levels adjustment layer onto these mountains here, and we're just going to boost up the contrast a little bit, so we'll bring in the shadows and the highlights. And then I want to go to our other mountain layer, and then we're just going to drop the brightness on this just a little bit. All right, for this next section, we're going to go back to our grass layers, and we're just going to try to match all of this together. So we're going to use the selective color adjustment layer, and we're also going to use a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And I'm just going to kind of go back and forth over all of these different layers and just try to find a nice happy medium or something that is kind of along the lines that I'm looking for. And I'm not really going to talk over this, so I will be back with you all in just a second. Alright, so I think we're at a pretty good spot where I have a nice foundation to build off of. What I'm going to do now real fast is just clean this up in all of these layers and just make it more organized for myself. Alright, so on our field layer, let's go ahead and add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And I'm going to just desaturate this. And once I do that, let's do a color balance adjustment layer and just play around with some of these anchors. Our sky itself and our mountains aren't very saturated, so I just want to kind of imitate that and not be so vibrant. But because our foreground is closest to us, I want to bring back some of that saturation, so I'm going to paint black on that layer mask. And now we can kind of repeat similar steps with our rock layer and our rock group, So we're going to add a color balance adjustment layer first. We'll clip it below, and let's just introduce some of those warmer tones. And then we can go to a hue and saturation adjustment layer, drop down the saturation on this. And then we can even go to our opacity and drop it down just a little bit on there as well. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to add some atmospheric haze to our background mountains. In reality, and I don't even know what the exact term of this is, but just the further things are away from you, you start to have a little bit of that haze that's obviously going to be very similar to the sky and your environment of that particular area. So that's what I want to achieve now. We're going to create a new layer. And then let's use our eyedropper tool and just sample some of these colors and tones in our sky. And then using a soft round brush, we're just going to paint over our mountains and give it that hazy look. We also want to be sure that we're using different tones in our sky to help us out with this effect as well. We then want to convert this image into a smart object and then go to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur so we can add some blur to this. This will also help create that realistic depth of field effect that we're going for. And we want to do the same thing with our mountains on the right. All right, so with that taken care of, let's jump into our field group, and we want to find that layer that's kind of that valley in the back left corner there. And we want to create a new layer on top of this, and let's add some atmospheric haze on top of that. So just a little bit there. And then we can do the same thing with the ground on the right side. We don't want to do too much in front of us since it's close to us, just the area that's further into the distance. And with those adjustments made, we need to change the tone a little bit of our foreground. So I'm using a selective color adjustment layer to help us out with that. And then I will also need to use the hue and saturation adjustment layer and do some modifications in there. We can also give this foreground just a touch of Gaussian blur as well. All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm using this custom-made grass brush, and I'm painting black on our foreground layer mask because I don't want to have this really nice and clean edge between our foreground and our middle ground, and I'm just kind of painting this away to make things blend just a bit better. And I actually have a tutorial on how I made this brush, so if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. All right, let's go ahead and continue. We can add a hue and saturation adjustment layer and go to our yellows, and let's desaturate that because we want it to match the rest of our ground in our picture. And I know I don't want our ground to be so desaturated, so let's go ahead and go and find a soft round brush. Let's switch to that and just paint black on some of that. That's going to be closest to us because we still want to have that a bit saturated. Since we're making these adjustments with our foreground, our rock layer is now standing out quite a bit. So let's add a hue and saturation adjustment layer to that, go to our yellows, and then desaturate those so that way it meshes well with the others. Okay, so now let's go ahead and give our rock layer some Gaussian blur because it is the closest thing in front of us and it's not going to be so focused. Okay, so we are coming to the end here. Everything is pretty much blended together nicely. However, I just don't like the overall tone of this composition. It's a bit dull for my taste. So let's do some color grading. And for this example, I'm going to add a color lookup, and let's experiment with some of these filters. And just cycling through these is definitely the way to go if you're not sure what you're looking for. They can just spark a bit of inspiration for you. And this one, we'll go with fall colors. I really like this. I like the warmth that it adds to this composition. And we can even add a lens flare. So let's create a new layer above our sky, and then let's fill that with black. And then at the top of the screen, we need to click on Filter, And we need to scroll all the way down to render and then lens flare. From here, you can just play around with any of these settings. You can also play around with the brightness as well. Drag it to where you want it to be, and once you have it, go ahead and click OK. And then we can Command T, and let's go ahead and scale this down a little bit. This is going to act as our sun. So let's just kind of position this in a nice spot, and then we'll put this into the screen blending mode. We can go back and hit Command T, and maybe we can just move this around somewhere to see if it looks better. So let's just play around with this for a second. So up here actually looks really nice. And then let's add a new layer on top. Press Command Shift Option E, merge them all together, convert it to a smart object. Then we can group the remaining layers together. And then we can go into the Camera Raw filter. Let's first make sure our top layer is selected, and then Filter, Camera Raw filter. And then I'm just going to make some final adjustments here. I will be back with you in a second. Alright, so here we are with our final adjustments. We can even do a quick before and after to see what that Camera Raw filter bought us. And yeah, this came together nicely. It definitely came through the vision that I had in my mind, just this nice, warm wilderness environment. And I actually need to throw myself under the bus here for a second. And it wasn't something I noticed until I started doing the edits, but I need to say something before someone says it in the comment section. If you look at the mountains, where the shadows and lighting are, the sun should be placed kind of on that right side. We have it on the left. So when you're making your picture, don't be a doofus like me and try to get your ducks in a row first and just make sure everything is accurate as it should be. It was too late and I didn't really want to go back and fix it, so we're just going to have to deal with it. Other than that though, I do hope you enjoyed this video and hopefully you can learn a lot that you can apply to your own work. If you like this video, as always, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see a different scene that you want me to create, let me know in that comment section and maybe we can do something like that in the future. Other than that, stay safe and hope to see you back tomorrow. Take care.